Get some! All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. Interesting day, filled with controversy. And in some directions you might not expect. So as always, welcome to the Young Turks. If you were expecting a show that is regular and normal, you have come to the wrong place. All right.
We have a very irregular show.
We have a very, look, we are the marshals of talk shows filled with irregulars. For all of you guys who shopped at Marshalls when you were young, or now.
Oh, Marshalls. I love Marshalls, but you're right about irregulars.
The irregulars.
100%.
Maybe we should name a show that, the irregulars.
Yeah.
All right, Casper.
We begin with Marjorie Greene.
Then January 6th happens, and next thing you know, I organized the whole thing along with Steve Bannon here. And I want to tell you something, if Steve Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won.
MAGA Congresswoman Marjorie Greene is about to express how she would have used more violence to carry out a successful insurrection. Let's hear more of what she has to say.
Not to mention, it would have been armed. Yeah. See, that's the whole joke, isn't it? They say that whole thing was planned, and I'm like, are you kidding me? A bunch of conservatives, Second Amendment supporters went in the Capitol without guns, and they think that we organized that? I don't think so.
So for Marjorie Greene, who was speaking at the New York Young Republican Club Gala, what went wrong during the insurrection was there just wasn't enough violence, there weren't enough guns. And I do want to be clear, there were individuals there who were armed, and luckily they did not fire shots because that would have exacerbated the situation and more people could have died. But it also turns out that based on reporting from Rolling Stone, Marjorie Greene was involved in the planning for what happened, what transpired on January 6th. In an October 2021 piece that Rolling Stone reporter Hunter Walker published, he discloses that he had spoken to 3 different sources who were involved in the organizing and planning of the Stop the Steal, speech and rally that Donald Trump was speaking at, of course, that preceded the riots that took place immediately after. And one of them said this, okay, this is one of the Stop the Steal organizers. I remember Marjorie Taylor Greene specifically. I remember talking to probably close to a dozen other members at one point or another, or their staffs. And as Rolling Stone reported at the time, these 2 sources also helped plan a series of demonstrations that took place in multiple states around the country in the weeks between the election and the storming of the Capitol. According to these sources, multiple people associated with the March for Trump and Stop the Steal events that took place during this period communicated with members of Congress throughout this process. So Marjorie Greene wasn't the only one. Paul Gosar was also mentioned by these sources. So A, she's wrong about them not being armed. There were people armed at the riots. And 2, she was involved according to people who organized the events on that day. Cenk.
Yeah, so one of her excuses was, I got here on January 3rd because she was a newly elected congresswoman at the time. And they're saying that I planned this thing on January 6th. Can you imagine anything more absurd? But wait a minute, hold on. We know that you won in early November, and so do all the right wingers who were ecstatic that you won. It was not a surprise that you were going to Congress. Nobody found out on January 2nd, okay? So would they have been talking to you as an incoming member of the House? Of course, well, at least would they have wanted to talk to you? Yes, and now there's reporting that says they did in fact talk to you. Marjorie Taylor Greene lying. Wow, I never could have seen that coming. Okay, but guys, what's more important is that there's two different tracks on January 6th. We emphasize this probably more than any other show. There's the on the ground violence, law breaking, etc., that we can all see with our own eyes. That's of course really bad, and they also came with nooses and zip ties and all that stuff, and we're chanting about murdering government officials, including, of course, Mike Pence, right? So, but what is arguably worse is the actual coup attempt that had nothing to do with violence on that day. It had to do with a fake elector scheme where they would pretend that Trump won when they all full well knew that he didn't. And the guy who helped to mainly organize that is the person she mentioned, Steve Bannon. So when she says, if Steve and I had done it, we would have won, that's empirically untrue. Steve Bannon did plan it and he didn't win. So just so you're clear on that. And then one more thing for now. Look, I think the most dangerous part of this, of course, is when she says we would have come armed. Basically, she's saying, signaling to the audience, remember guys, next time when you go, make sure you bring your guns. And that is the potential disaster of having lunatics like Marjorie Taylor Greene in power.
And just, I mean, by extension of what she's saying, just visualize what she's calling for, how it would have gone down had more people been armed, because there were people who were armed. And luckily, I mean, and miraculously, they didn't open fire. But what exactly would the armed individuals do, Marjorie Greene? They'd open fire and do what? They would murder the cops that are trying to protect the lawmakers?
100%, and then the lawmakers.
Exactly.
I mean, who would they shoot? You say, hey, they would, if we organized, they would have come armed. Armed to do what? Well, we know who the confrontation was with. It was with cops, and if they got past the cops, Secret Service, and if they got past the Secret Service, they would have presumably used those weapons that, well, we didn't talk about it, Marjorie Taylor Greene's talking about it. Bring the weapons so you could use it to kill what? Her colleagues? The former Republican vice president of the United States? So these are the sick people that are on the right. And as always, I'll bring media a little bit into it, because then you'll see guys like Anderson Cooper say, this happens on both sides. Well, no, it doesn't. Look, there's now rising left-wing clownishness that we're gonna talk about later in the program, okay? But this talk of grab your guns and show up somewhere happens 98% on the right wing.
Exactly, and what also should be a cause for concern is how many newly elected Republican lawmakers were present during that speech. None of them have spoken out against the violence that's being promoted by the likes of Marjorie Greene. The people there include New York's George Santos, Georgia's Mike Collins, and Florida's Corey Mills. And I also want to note that while several of the militia members who were part of the riots that day have pleaded guilty to sedition and will be serving a considerable amount of time in prison as a result of that, and others have been found guilty of sedition, Marjorie Greene sees them as political prisoners. She thinks that they're just brave patriots who have been made political prisoners by our government. Should also note that more than 275 have been charged with assaulting or impeding law enforcement. And oftentimes you'll hear from local police departments making such claims about individuals that they're trying to put behind bars. But we have video evidence of what happened and what transpired that day on January 6th, including several public hearings that were conducted by the House committee investigating what transpired on January 6th. So to treat them as if they're innocent individuals who have been made to be political prisoners is ridiculous, but it gives you a sense of what her mindset is really about.
Okay, but hey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if you think they're political prisoners, you are saying by definition, breaking into the Capitol, breaking into individual offices, and then doing all the things that they did, breaking things, stealing things, chanting about murdering people are all okay. And they are poor people who did all these wonderful things and are now being held as political prisoners. So what if left-wing activists broke into your office and did whatever the hell they wanted and started chanting, hang Marjorie Taylor Greene? Now, I would be deeply opposed to that. I would be the first person to say that's monstrous and you should definitely not do that. And whoever does that should be immediately arrested. But you're telling us now, oh yeah, break into my office and threaten violence, because I think that that's a wonderful thing that is part of freedom. I think that's a terrible message to send out. No one should listen to her. No one on the left wing, no one on the right wing, because has mental problems and she's trying to drive violence, and she has no idea what she's doing because she's too painfully dumb to understand the consequences of her actions.
All right, let's move on to our next story. You're watching Los Angeles City Council member Kevin DeLeon getting violently confronted by an activist named Jason Reedy during the Lincoln Park tree lighting celebration. DeLeon claims that Reedy kept shoving him with his pelvis before he headbutted him. Let's watch the rest. Now, Reedy, the activist you see in Kevin DeLeon's face, is an activist and organizer with a group in Los Angeles known as the People's City Council. The Los Angeles Police Department is now investigating the matter. Both parties have filed police reports, and both parties, of course, claim that the other party was the aggressor here. But my view of this video and what transpired is pretty clear. Before I give you my thoughts and some more background into this story, I want to go to you, Cenk, and get some of your thoughts on what we see in that video.
Yeah. So we're from the left wing, and so we should be predisposed to agreeing with Reedy in this case. And Kevin DeLeon is someone we ran a campaign against when Allison Hartson ran against him for Senate in California. So no love lost there. I have eyes though. You guys have eyes, you can see the video, right? So when the activist is up in his grill with a lot of people around him and they're still in public, I might not like that tactic, but I think it's kosher, okay? I think it's fine. When the activist pushes past an entry point there where they're trying to get him out of public, it's obvious, and he shouldn't. That was a red line he shouldn't have crossed. Okay, all right, maybe we can recover from that red line. When he gets up within an inch of his face, we cannot recover from that. The activist is clearly wrong. Okay, we'll talk about all the feelings that are hurt about that. And then you see on the video, you can call it a headbutt. You could say lightly touch his head to DeLeon's head, but there is no question that Reedy initiated the contact. Again, if you think there's a question, you can watch the video. You can come to your own conclusion. A lot of people watch that same video. It's a Rorschach test, and they come to completely different conclusions, right? What I saw was Reedy clearly touched DeLeon first, okay? And then when that happens, at least with the head, right? And when that happens, DeLeon then wrestles him back. Not guilty. Okay, we'll give you the rest now.
Yes, okay, so I actually want to repeat what I said in the lead to the story. So DeLeon is accusing Reedy of first thrusting his pelvis at DeLeon, which you can't see in the video really because of the fact that there's a bunch of people swarming DeLeon. You can't see their bodies, but you can see a few things. So I want to go to two screenshots, beginning with this one. This screenshot shows DeLeon. This is after he had tried to get away, right? They went through a doorway, and Reedy followed him. DeLeon, you can see clearly he's got his hands up. He's trying to get away from the situation. He's not trying to escalate it further. Let's go to the next one. This next video, I think, shows the clearest evidence we can see of, Reedy touching DeLeon's head, because DeLeon, of course, accuses him of headbutting him. And I took the moment in the video and slowed it down just to kind of see it in slow motion. You guys can judge for yourselves. Let's take a quick look at that. Let's keep our mics up though. So you can see, yeah, I mean.
No, it's Reedy. There's no question it's Reedy.
Yeah. And so after that, DeLeon did what I think, listen, once someone puts their hands on you or touches you, makes physical contact in an aggressive way, I believe you have the right to defend yourself.
And the guy you don't believe that. That's just a fact.
It's a fact. No, absolutely. And so, listen, if you've been following local politics in Los Angeles, then you're privy to some of the tactics that this activist group has been using. It's been getting increasingly violent. It is not effective. I think it's super counterproductive to anything the left actually wants to accomplish here. And I want to give you a few more details based on witness testimony, people who were there, what they experienced. And keep in mind, this was a tree lighting ceremony with hundreds of children. Hundreds of children were there. They were terrified about what was transpiring.
And then, Anna, before you give all the facts, I just want to say afterwards, I'm going to explain what the standard should be for aggressive left-wing activists who want to do the right thing. Because we have to be constructive about how the right way to approach this is. So we'll do that at the end of all the facts.
So according to the Los Angeles Times, which in my opinion never loses an opportunity to provide cover for the activists, that's what I've noticed in their reporting. In this case, luckily, they spoke to some of the witnesses, including Alan Ochoa, a DJ at the event, said he was DJing when a group of about 5 people walked in and started shouting, "You're a racist" at De Leon. Ochoa said De Leon got off of the stage and tried to walk away, but the group started getting into his face. Soon after, he said, children started to cry and run. He also told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "If you're going to be proving your point, do it outside. Don't go in there and mess up a whole community event. As it is, we live in a low-income community, and these guys are coming here who don't even live there, messing it up for our community." Now, the allegation regarding racism has to do with the tapes that were leaked. The Los Angeles City Council members who were having a private conversation, that conversation was being secretly recorded and it was leaked. That conversation was disgusting and racist, mostly because of what former LA City Council President Nury Martinez was saying. She eventually resigned and stepped down, as she should have. And there has been this effort to try to get Kevin De Leon to step down. He's refusing to do it. Now, my view on his participation in that conversation is a little different from what the activists are saying, okay? So here is the moment in question, the moment that has led the activists to call for Kevin De Leon to step down. They're talking about former city council member Mike Bonin, who had adopted a son who happens to be black, and Nury Martinez made an allegation that Mike Bonin treats his son as an accessory, and Kevin De Leon contributed to that part of the discussion. Here it is.
He goes, "Where's with Bonin?" I said, "Bonin thinks he's black. That guy don't think he's black." I go, "He thinks he's black." I told her the same thing. He goes, "Why are they so close?" No idea.
He's from Massachusetts. Es que the one here, that's kid.
Yeah. Lo trae así during Black History Month, lo lleva al council y lo pone acá en el, remember, it's an accessory. When we do the MLK parade.
Just like when
they used to have those statues in plantations.
And then when Nury brings her Uygur bag or the Louis Vuitton bag in place,
like on the side, and so lo trae, ¿verdad?
So that was really, I've listened to the whole tape. That was the most questionable thing that Kevin De Leon said, which was after Nury Martinez said that Bonin treats his son as an accessory. Kevin De Leon brought up designer bags as accessories, right? And it was more a criticism toward Mike Bonin as opposed to a racist message about the 2-year-old son. Now, Nury Martinez said horrendous, hideous things. But the other thing I want to bring up is, it is fascinating to see how the activists pick and choose who they're going to target and attack. Now, Kevin De Leon was elected into the city council. During these city council meetings where people get to engage in public comment, Latinos living in his district have gone up and said, we don't want him to resign, right? So his term is up in 2024. So essentially bullying him or intimidating him to resign hasn't worked, and they're getting increasingly aggressive with their tactics. Now, during those tapes, something that got no attention, that did not sit well with me, was when Nury Martinez was talking about the MLK parade and how she was on a float with other, local politicians, including, at the time, Karen Bass, who was a member of Congress. Karen Bass was there, And she said she engaged in a conversation with Karen Bass about Mike Bonin's son, who was 2 years old at the time. No one cared about this. No one questioned Karen Bass and her engagement in this conversation. But here's the part that I'm talking about.
It's me and Karen Bass on the floor trying to check this little kid. Me, Karen Bass, y la esposa de Marquise, Carrie. And we're all looking at each other because we're the three women on the floor. Like, who's gonna? This kid's gonna tip us over. Because he's literally hanging on the rail like a little white kid, which I was like, this kid needs a beat down. Like, let me take him around the corner and then I'll bring him back.
Yeah.
I would like a statement from Karen Bass about her involvement in that conversation about beating up a 2-year-old black boy. Just curious about that, because now she's mayor. I didn't want to bring it up prior to the election because, of course, I'd get all sorts of allegations about how I'm trying to prevent Karen Bass from getting elected and how I'm trying to put my thumb on the scale. But the fact of the matter is, if you compare her involvement in that conversation about the MLK parade to what Kevin De Leon said, really? Like, why are we choosing to go after Kevin De Leon so aggressively compared to what Karen Bass engaged in?
So we covered the story. You can see it for yourself. It's online. And I thought what Nori Martinez said at times crossed over into racism.
Of course, yeah.
But at the same time, here in that portion of the conversation, she's talking about how her and Karen Bass, who's black, agreed that
they need to check the boy.
That they would take the boy around the corner and check him, etc., because his white dad was not doing it. Okay. Now, whether Karen Bass actually said that, we don't know, right? Because it's relayed to you through Nori Martinez, and so I wouldn't say Karen Bass is definitely guilty, but I'd ask her a question about it. And in these activists that are up in everybody's faces, I never see them up in Karen Bass's face. I'm not, and by the way, don't. Okay, there's the right way to do it and wrong way to do it. But Anna's right, for some reason, Karen Bass, who could have been a central figure in this, is not at all discussed. But De Leon, who was in the room and made a comment about Gucci or something.
Louis Vuitton,
yeah. When he was talking about Mike Bonin and not the kid, is somehow like the worst of the worst. That doesn't make any sense at all. Now, if you say, hey, I don't like that De Leon was in the room and he didn't speak up, that makes sense, okay? And that's a perfectly valid opinion. If you think De Leon should resign, perfectly valid opinion, okay? And we can agree or disagree about that. But by the way, for a lot of these activists, it has nothing to do with that event. They were doing this stuff well before. It's because they disagree with them on policy, on homelessness and crime, etc. So they're using this as an excuse to just go further. And
Reedy has had, confrontations with De Leon in the past. In March, he was verbally challenging De Leon during an outdoor event when the councilman reached to cover Reedy's cell phone camera with his hand, just covering the cell phone so he wasn't filming it anymore. At a downtown event months later, Reedy was taping him again. It's just constant confrontations with De Leon, right? That has continued to escalate, and it escalated to the point where we showed you with this, interaction at the tree lighting event. Now, going back to what happened, what transpired just a few days ago, a social worker who was present at the event and identified himself only as Giovanni for fear of retaliation, told the Times that he saw Reedy unsuccessfully try to headbutt De Leon. Jennifer Barraza, De Leon's chief of staff, said that amid the melee, Reedy clipped her in the chin with his elbow. Reedy's attorney has denied that this has happened, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think she's saying that he did it purposely. It's just they're in an altercation, and because of that altercation and because of her close proximity to it, he elbowed her chin. Now, at one point, actually, let me open it up to you because there's other contextual information that I want to provide the audience so they kind of understand what's going on here. Because I think the way it's being presented right now is, here you have a run-of-the-mill Democrat. We've been critical of him for various reasons, right? Mm-hmm. And look at these innocent, wonderful activists who are doing nothing wrong, and then they get beaten up by Kevin De Leon. But no, that is not what's happening. Yeah. I think the tactics that they've been using and basically escalating over the last several months is incredibly toxic, is incredibly dangerous. And even when it comes to a newly elected city council member who they don't like, who just got elected, just got sworn in, they just engage in these intimidation and bullying tactics. Yeah. I'm sorry, but people's votes matter. Just because you don't like that person who just got elected into the district she got elected in doesn't mean you get to go terrorize her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, guys, on the tapes, they also brazenly, openly talked about corruption, but no one gives a damn about that.
Of course.
No, that to me is a massive toxic issue, but the activists don't care about it, even though they're left wing, I don't get it. Certainly the media never cares about it, and the establishment loves it. So that's somehow not an issue. Okay, but I don't, we ran a race against De Leon, right? I got no interest in De Leon. I see national headlines now about how De Leon attacked an activist. I watch the video and I go, wait, who attacked who? What are we being serious here? So no, I don't accept this at all. So I want to tell you what I think is the right thing to do. Guys, we need civil disobedience. That doesn't mean what the mainstream media and establishment Democrats and Republicans want, which is civil obedience. It doesn't mean that. You should not be obedient, okay, to the powerful. On the other hand, it also does not mean uncivil disobedience. Martin Luther King didn't say, get in the grill, man, okay? Martin Luther King said, have the courage to walk where they tell you not to walk sometimes, okay? But by the way, he also clarified that he was always right on federal law. Martin Luther King was, and the civil rights movement was. It was actually the local sheriffs that were breaking the law, okay? And so yes, you can say, hey, we're gonna take over this area. We're gonna tell you ahead of time. We've done civil disobedience. We've done it with Democracy Spring and many other things. And we train people before we go out there to make sure that nothing physical happens and violence doesn't break out. Because if violence does break out, not only are you then on the morally wrong end of it, but you've also done something terribly counterproductive. It doesn't take courage to throw a punch, it takes courage to take a punch. They didn't cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge looking to tackle the sheriffs on the cops. No, they were doing a peaceful march when the cops ran into them and did that cavalry charge on them. Yeah. And they had the courage to withstand that, not to go provoke it. Okay.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that point because fairly recently there was an incident involving recruits for, I believe, the LAPD, if I'm not mistaken, possibly the sheriff's department. But nonetheless, they were new recruits who were, training to become law enforcement in Los Angeles. And during a morning training exercise, as a big group of them were jogging, a man ran them over. That's being investigated. We don't know if he fell asleep behind the wheel. We don't know if it's intentional. Again, it's being investigated. But when the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department had tweeted about it, and bunch of recruits, like young men, got run over by this guy. Some of them are still in the hospital. The People's City Council responded to the Sheriff's Department tweet about it, saying, please let us know how we can bail out this hero. That's who they are. So when you mention the nonviolence component of it, no, they like the violence, they encourage the violence, and they see the recruits getting run over as a good thing. The person doing it is a hero in their minds. And these are innocent people, they're recruits, they're not even cops yet. It's like
So guys, when we cover the right wing and you show violence, like even as a giant attack like January 6th, we clarify, yes, but does that mean all Republicans, some Republicans? And then we show you polling. And unfortunately, a huge percentage of Republicans did approve of what happened on January 6th, and they do approve of violence. Now, when we show you polling from the left wing, almost no one approves of violence, except this very tiny sliver of so-called left-wing activists, right? And so, but what the press then sees is, oh, the left wing likes violence too. No one voted on it. No one agreed to it. You don't represent the whole left wing. You're lucky to represent your tiny little sliver of the left wing. And so you can come at me, bro, with your ideas about how, no, I am the true leftist. True leftists believe in getting within 1 inch of a guy's face in a place I'm not supposed to be, and then touching his head, and then getting, oh, I'm so golly gee, I don't know why he put his hands on me. Please, come on. Nobody believes that.
Yeah.
And God bless you if you do, but I saw the tape. Everybody's seen the tape. And so, I don't agree.
Even before the racist tape was leaked of the city council members engaging in that conversation, the intimidation tactics, the threats of violence were already being implemented. So I'll give you another example. So back in August of this year, the city council was considering banning homeless encampments near schools, and the activists were not in favor of that. And so one of the activists, again, this is August, the tapes came out in October. One of the activists, who's been identified as Miss Italy, decided to charge at members of the city council. Here's the video.
How dare you say that the people that are here are not unhoused? How dare you? I live in District 14. You don't
19, 26, and 40. No, sergeants.
You don't these people are not on the street. I live on the street. You preach.
And I want to also draw attention to the swearing-in ceremony for Tracy Park, a newly elected city council member who was elected on the west side of Los Angeles. Newly elected, just got sworn in. And the swearing-in ceremony was interrupted incessantly by activists who just don't like her. They don't like the way the vote went, just like Donald Trump's supporters on January 6th. And I want to give you just one example of what the swearing-in ceremony looked like. Apparently the votes of the people living in the west side of Los Angeles don't matter because the activists would prefer whoever candidate they were endorsing to fill that seat.
Yeah, look, there's a million things wrong with our elections. Nobody talks about it more than we do. That's a fact. I started a whole organization called Wolfpack to get money out of politics so we can actually fix our elections. But whether we like it or not, Joe Manchin has been elected as a senator of West Virginia, okay? The way that you get him unelected is not by headbutting him, but by organizing effectively to vote him out, okay? So, and whenever you see a situation like this, you have to think, what if the shoe was on the other foot? So imagine a right-wing activist getting in Bernie Sanders' face like that, or AOC's face like that, or Ilhan Omar, or any of them. What would I do? I'll tell you right now what I'd do. Anyway, I don't want to get into it, but this is not helpful. You want to be loud? Definitely. You want to show up in public areas? Definitely, okay? In that situation, there were judgment calls that were made that I don't agree with while they were still in the public area. Once the kids all start crying and you've created an unbelievable mess, you've already lost everyone, right? Now you're doing damage to your cause because the minute everybody sees the video, they think, oh, who are the monsters here? Oh, the ones making the little kids cry. So thanks a lot for helping our cause, right?
Right.
Okay, but those are judgment calls. But once you cross the red lines of going into a private area and making physical contact, no, that is not a judgment call. Then you're saying, I'm not a progressive. I'm just a radical who wants to take physical action here. And you don't represent any of the rest of us, so please don't pretend you do.
All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the airline industry and how they are willing to make us less safe, willing to risk our lives just to save a buck or two. That and more coming right up.
TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, but also Meredith Putvin and Julian Johnson. They just became members. We love you guys for it. They hit the join button below on YouTube, and you can do it at tyt.com/join as well. All right, Anna, what's next?
Well, some pretty terrifying news about the airline industry, as if flying wasn't awful enough already. Well, the airline industry has been lobbying quietly but aggressively for a cost-saving and life-threatening move that could cut co-pilots out of flights entirely, leaving passengers with just one pilot on each flight. Now, the industry wants to amend what's known as Part 121 of the Federal Aviation Regulations, which requires air carriers to have 2 pilots in the cockpit, and for good reason. And I'll give you examples for why it's a good reason to have 2 pilots in just a moment. But the reason why they're doing this is because, of course, they want to maximize their profits, number one. And they're trying to mitigate the high cost of fuel, but also the ongoing pilot shortage, which they could solve by, treating their pilots a lot better. But nonetheless, there is language in a new bill now introduced in Congress, the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Bill, asking the Federal Aviation Administration to reconsider Part 121 and to allow the use of a single pilot operation. But don't worry, guys. First, they'll do this in cargo aircraft, okay? Meaning they're gonna try to ease their way into this so they don't get too much backlash from the public. But understand the ultimate goal is to cut the number of pilots from 2 to 1, and that will be a disaster. And it's not just the United States, because the airline industry, of course, is international. And I'm really sad to find that there are legislative proposals in other places. More than 40 countries have appealed to an international aviation agency to revise standards globally to give airlines the option for a 1-person cockpit crew. So the fight is just getting started. And again, it's really, really important to have more than 1 pilot, because there have been incidents where the main pilot is incapacitated and the co-pilot needs to take charge. In fact, there was a situation less than 2 weeks ago in a flight, an American Eagle flight. The co-pilot had to make an emergency call after the main pilot was incapacitated. And here's how that went down.
Captain is incapacitated. Did you have any information I need to pass along to the tower in terms of paramedics, gate number, any of that? No gate number, and he's knocked out. We're going to need paramedics working on everything right now. Okay, thank you.
Runway 28 Center, clear to land, and just advise if you need any assistance.
Clear land, 28 Center, and we'll exit. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to have to move the captain from the seat, get to the gate.
Are we really having a conversation about this?
Yeah, of course we are.
This is so mental.
Of course.
So imagine that there is no co-pilot in that scenario. Is the flight attendant supposed to get in there and go, okay, the pilot's been incapacitated. How the hell do I land this thing? Okay, are we supposed to say, hey, is there a doctor on the plane? Is there a pilot on the plane? This is mental. This is like going from late stage capitalism to something else. I don't know what to call it, killer capitalism, something like that, where, I mean, we told you this before, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are on the Supreme Court because they said corporations can basically kill their employees and get away with it. And so in this case, they're like, well, maybe there's 3 or 5 or 800 people on a plane, but we'd like to cut costs. And by the way, it happens all the time. I mean, look at what happened in Texas. They cut costs on their energy grid, and then it turns out, oops, there was a cold patch and people froze to death. But hey, they cut costs. You're dead, but they cut costs and saved a lot of money. By the way, it happens here in California too, with PG&E not burying their lines. And so there falls, it creates fires, people die, right? But PG&E didn't want to cut their costs. And they'd already bribed all the Democrats in California, and the energy folks in Texas had bribed the Republicans. So will they let them get away with this? Yes, I'd be shocked if they didn't. And at some point you will see a story, 2, 5, 7 years from now, where we will play a clip from this episode and then tell you about a 1-person run plane where the pilot passed out and everybody on board died. But in the meanwhile, all the airlines will have saved tons of money.
And keep in mind, I mean, airlines love to make themselves out to be victims of what happened during the pandemic. Oh my God, we lost everything. I mean, we're really struggling, except since the pandemic, they're now making profits again. In the second quarter of this year, they made $2.2 billion in profits alone, profits, okay? So that's after all the operating costs, after all the salaries, $2.2 billion in profits. Now, their pre-tax operating income was $4.7 billion.
By the way, I'm a business person. The correct number is the 4.7 billion.
Yeah.
So that's a ton, of course you pay taxes on your profits. So that's a ton of profit to make. But nope, it's never enough. The green machine has to be fed. Cut the pilots, cut the flight attendants, charge for the space above you, the space below you, the space next to you. Charge, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Remember, this is the industry that created the quote unquote misery index, where the more miserable you are, the more they can charge you things to make you unmiserable.
Less miserable, yeah.
Right? So they literally create situations to make you miserable so they could charge you to not be miserable. That's this industry.
One of the things that they've started doing increasingly is you have to pay extra to be able to pick your seat on the flight. And it's really important that you're able to do that, not only because you want to have the ability to pick a seat that you're more comfortable in, but because they purposely overbook the flights. So if you don't have an assigned seat, the possibility of you getting kicked off that flight that you've paid for increases significantly, right? So there's all sorts of tricks and disgusting gimmicks that these airlines are engaging in. I also want to note though, we bailed out the airline industry to the tune of $54 billion through various stimulus packages. So if they're whining and crying about the pandemic, just keep in mind that they got quite a bit of assistance from the federal government. And then internationally speaking, profits have been pretty good. Okay, so let me give you the details on that. Let's go to graphic 5 here. The International Air Transport Association expects a net profit of 4.7 billion for the industry next year, with more than 4 billion passengers set to fly. It had previously said only that profits were within reach in 2023. So they're noticing that business is going real well. People are traveling, fears about the pandemic have pretty much subsided. So they're bragging about their profits while simultaneously lobbying internationally to cut labor costs by minimizing the number of pilots on these flights. It is a disaster, but this is how it works. This is how the model works, right? Profits over people's lives. We've seen it happen over and over again. Why would we think for a second that the airline industry would be any different? All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, pretty incredible young man, Andrew Hartzler, speaks out against his homophobic aunt, a United States congresswoman. We've got that story and more coming right up.
Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. I want to thank Dave Schmidt 311 on Twitch. Gifted 2 subs again today. Does it all the time, and I love how open and generous and consistent you are. Thank you, Dave. All right, Anna.
All right, let's go to our next story.
Today, a United States Congresswoman, my Aunt Vicky, started crying because gay people like me can get married.
I hope.
That's Andrew Hartzler, who is about to call out the Republican you see on tape right now, Vicky Hartzler, for not only being an embarrassing homophobe, but also being a terrible aunt.
Pray that my colleagues will find the courage to join me in opposing this misguided and this dangerous bill. I yield back.
So despite coming out to my aunt this past February, I guess she's still just as much as a homophobe.
So it takes courage to come out against a homophobic family member like Congresswoman Hartzler. And I want to give Andrew a lot of credit for speaking out the way he has. We've also learned a lot about him, including the kind of activism he's been engaged in, which I think has been tremendously helpful and important. In the video that he posted on TikTok, he also goes on to debunk the lies that his aunt told on the House floor. And of course, the speech happened at a time when the House was about to vote on legislation that would provide some protections for same-sex couples in this country. Luckily, that legislation passed, even though it wasn't as strong as I would have liked it to be. But nonetheless, here's more from Andrew, who debunks his hateful aunt.
Bergefell is not in danger, but people and institutions of faith are.
Aunt Vicky, that's not right. Institutions of faith like religious universities are not being silenced. They're being empowered by the US government to discriminate against tens of thousands of LGBTQ students because of religious exemptions, but they still receive federal funding.
the bill's implications, submit to our ideology, or be silenced.
It's more like you want the power to force your religious beliefs onto everyone else. And because you don't have that power, you feel like you're being silenced. But you're not. You're just gonna have to learn to coexist with all of us. And I'm sure it's not that hard.
I love this guy, he's awesome. So we're gonna go to an interview that he had with CNN in just a moment, where he talks about how his aunt's policies, led to a lot of difficulty in his life growing up. But just to give you a little more on his background, he grew up down the block from her in Kansas City, Missouri. He said he recalls childhood memories of picnics, bike rides, and trips to Washington, D.C. with her. But he eventually came out as gay to Hartzler, and she didn't handle it well. He says, quote, "I was met with the same type of, I love you, but I don't accept you because you're gay. I'm in the mindset where if you're not for me, you're against me. And if you don't 100% accept me, you reject me." That's what Andrew Hartzler had to say about her reaction to him when he came out as gay. They haven't really talked since then. And she, of course, based on the videos that we've shown you, has continued to push for anti-gay policies in this country, which is disgusting to say the least. Cenk.
Yeah, so let me make a distinction here. Let's see if this works. So if somebody came up to me and said, look, I know you, back when I was Muslim, or they found out that I grew up Muslim, I'm now an atheist, and said, you know what, even though you're a Muslim and that's a sin and it's terrible, I still accept you. I mean, I don't fully accept you, but I partly accept you. Would I be like, oh, that's so open-minded of you, I really appreciate it? No, and I do that exercise so that you can think about it from your identity, whatever it might be. Because we ask gay people to do it all the time. We're like, oh yeah, I mean, what you're doing is sinful and terrible and awful. But you know what, I don't fully hate you. I can maybe let you come to Thanksgiving. I'm gonna try to talk you out of it, who you are, because it's of course terrible and awful. What part of this is acceptable? No, it's totally not acceptable. So if you're telling me that I'm a bad person because of who I was born as, which isn't even remotely true, well, I think you're a bad person for saying such awful things to me.
Right, she decided to be a discriminative, hateful person.
Yeah.
Right, she made a decision.
Andrew didn't do anything but be born as he was, right? But his aunt made the decision to be hateful towards him for how he was born. By the way, if you criticize me for being an atheist though, and say, well, I mean, I still like you even though you're an atheist, that's different. That means we just disagree on opinions. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not a matter of, I was born this way or I was born that way. I criticize you for being black, but it's okay, I'll still allow you in the house. Wow, aren't you merciful? No, and on gay issues, it's the same exact thing.
Like the anti-gay bias and prejudice in her heart has to be so extreme, because one of the reasons why the country progressed toward a more, just a more positive attitude, accepting and tolerant attitude toward the LGBT community, although obviously we still have a lot of work to do, is because people started coming out. And family members who would kind of otherize gay couples had a moment of reckoning when they realized, oh, my own family members are actually identifying as gay, and I love my family members. I don't want to reject them. But for Vicky Hartzler, the hatred inside her heart is so extreme that she's willing to reject her own nephew, who she had a close relationship with, based on his identity, based on who he is as a person. And based on what I've seen from him, he seems like a lovely person, a lovely individual who's fighting for equality for other members of the LGBTQ community. In fact, during his recent CNN interview, he talked about how his aunt's work in Congress led to policies that tortured him growing up. So he discloses that in this next clip. Let's watch.
The harmful policies that she is a proponent of, they have like real consequences for young people like me. Like when I was at Oral Roberts University, I was subjected to conversion therapy like practices, and that was totally legal because of the policies that my aunt has helped put into place. So after I graduated, I partnered with the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, and together with 40 other students from institutions across the country, we are advocating for all students at religious universities to receive equal protections.
So he just mentioned some of the activism he engages in. The other work that he does is he's part of a class action lawsuit. He joined a class action lawsuit filed last year against the Department of Education that is seeking to end an exemption in federal civil rights law that, according to the suit, allows religiously affiliated universities that receive federal funding to openly discriminate against LGBTQ students. First of all, I'm glad that there's a class action lawsuit on that, because why is my taxpayer money going toward funding these disgusting, hateful institutions? I'm not okay with that. And so when there are private schools that discriminate against various groups of people, since they're not receiving federal funding, they're free to do so. I mean, the whole argument from the right wing in regard to these universities that have been protesting right-wing speakers is, well, you're getting federal funds, and if you're not allowing right-wing speakers to come to your campus and speak, you should get those federal funds taken away. Interesting, they should expand that ideology, which I think is actually accurate, to what's happening at these religious institutions that are discriminating against LGBT individuals. Why are we giving them federal funding? Unacceptable.
Yeah, so if to anyone who says that gay people should do conversion therapy, if I was in that person's situation, I would say, you first. He said, what do you mean you first? Well, I think you should be converted from being straight to being gay. And they said, that's outrageous. You're right, it is outrageous. It's also outrageous for you to tell me that I should be converted from being gay to being straight. Why is it not equally outrageous to say, yeah, I think you should be gay? That's it, that's it. Being straight is a sin. It is awful and immoral. You should go to a therapist, and sometimes they should zap you with different things, etc., and maybe physically torture you until you're gay. Now, everyone would recognize that's patently absurd. It is equally absurd to try to make gay people do that to turn straight. It's absurd. Don't ever have a conversation about it. And anybody tells you, oh, you should do conversion therapy, they're saying, hey, can I receive permission to torture you? Okay. So, and then look, I want to say one last thing. I get it. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us were taught to hate gay people. Keep it real, okay? So now, did somebody ever tell me when I was growing up back in the 80s, oh, you should hate gay people? No, but what they did teach me, every part of society, being gay is wrong. It's wrong, it's wrong, it's immoral, it's immoral. Oh my God, if you're gay, that's terrible. And then you would hear things like, oh, did you hear? Bob's son turned out to be gay. Oh, what a shame, right? I've heard that 1,000 times in my life. And especially if you grew up when I did, right? That was 98% of people. So now I'm not saying that to shame you guys who grew up in that era that I did in, right? And by the way, many eras after that too. I'm saying that so I can tell you, I understand. You were taught it, and I got news for you. We were all brainwashed into thinking that being gay is terrible, and that's what has led to all of this hatred. And I'm asking you to unbrainwash yourself. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being gay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any gay sex acts. Oh, yeah, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin. No, it's not a sin. Calling it a sin is being deeply immoral against gay people.
All right, we got to take a break. There is some breaking news regarding Sam Bankman-Fried. We'll cover that in the second hour of the show. We also have a story involving militarizing students to recruit them into the military. We've got that story and more. Don't miss it. We'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.